Okay, in this module we are going to go through sentence shifters. That is, the sentence is going to shift direction. Let's take a look at this sentence right here. Though she was blank in public, she was known to be quiet and reserved in private. So, the first thing you may note here is the word though. This is what we call a reverser. Why? Well, here we have a blank. That blank is before a comma. Therefore, what comes before the comma, including this blank, is going to be opposite from what comes after the comma. So, what comes after the comma? She was quiet and reserved. Therefore, the opposite of quiet and reserved has to go here in the first blank. So let's just say loud and talking a lot. Okay, but before we go through here, match the answer choices with our own word, let's make sure that we learn a little bit more about this very pivotal word called the reverser. Well, there are other reversers, including though. There is although, there's even though, despite, yet, and but. These are all very important to know. They are by no means comprehensive. There are even more reversers. However, these are the most common. So again, we are going to note the function of the comma in the sentence makes the two parts different. That is, the first part is opposite of the second part. The second part is quiet and reserved. Therefore, the opposite, loud and talkative, has to go into the blank, our own word again. And then we come up with a word that is a synonym for our own word or words in this case. So, talkative. Well, loud and talking a lot, so that works pretty well. Let's circle that one. Cynical does not mean that. Soft-spoken is the opposite of what we're going because it's in private that she's soft-spoken. In public, she's the opposite. Arrogant doesn't necessarily mean speaking a lot or loudly, so that's gone. And generous doesn't relate at all. So there you can see again, the same basic strategies always hold true, but the key is to first identify the sentence. Okay? Now that we've done that, we've matched, we've got our answer, let's try another one. She was amiable and blank in public, comma, though. What do you notice that's different here? Well, the though doesn't come at the beginning of the sentence. However, it still serves the same function. As a reverser, it reverses the sentence so that the first part is opposite of the second part. So she was amiable and blank. And this functions also as an apposition here. The idea that amiable and blank, those words are going to be similar. So if you're not sure what amiable means, that's when this clue can really help you out. In private, she would frequently fall into protracted bouts of melancholy. So maybe that's a little bit confusing, but you do know the word melancholy, so you know that, hey, melancholy more or less means sad. So she was the opposite of sad in public. She was happy. So again, what did we do? Well, we noted that we had this reverser word, therefore the blank is in a certain relation to the comma. And now we have our word and we're going to match. So happy and downcast. Downcast, you're sad. Forlorn, you're very sad. Ostentatious, maybe you don't know it. Gregarious means that you are social. You're hanging out with other people. She's amiable, which means friendly. And you're contrasting this to hanging out at home and being sad. So could social work? Yeah, maybe. Definitely pretty close. And then we have hostile, which obviously doesn't work. So we have a word that could very well work, friendly and outgoing, versus sitting at home and being sad, versus this mystery word. And we're going to go with the word that more or less makes sense here, or makes pretty good sense, I should say. And that's good because, of course, that's the answer. Ostentatious means showing off, so that doesn't really relate here to the opposite of melancholy. So again, identify the sentence and then follow the basic steps and you'll get the answer right. Okay, this video we are dealing with another reverser or shifting sentence. And we, of course, want to note this new word here, that is however. This is another reverser. So let's read the sentence. An investigation that is unplanned can sometimes yield useful leads. The clue word here is unplanned. You have this unplanned investigation, sometimes helpful. However, so note, there's that reverser. So we are going to take that clue word and we're going to come up with the opposite. So Consistently finding helpful leads is usually contingent or based upon a blank search. Again, note sentence structure here. So we have our words, however, and then break down the sentence. And then, of course, we know the structure, and that is the opposite of unplanned here is a planned search. And again, that structure is we have a reverser. That reverser is separated, in this case, by both a semicolon and a comma. But we know that the first part of the sentence, starting with an investigation and going to here, that is to useful leads, is opposite from the part beginning here and ending with search. Again, the clue word is unplanned, therefore that's contrasted with a planned search. Now, of course, we match. Once we've opposed the keyword, we match. And by oppose, the keyword or the clue word is unplanned. And therefore, let's go through the answers. We have arbitrary. Arbitrary means random, without a purpose. We want planned. Premeditated. If you are premeditated, you think before you do something, you plan. And just like that, there is our answer. Whimsical means playful, and this fanciful, unpredictable sort of way doesn't work. Desultory means rambling and unplanned. It is a good GRE word to know, but it is not the answer. Aggressive, of course, does not mean planned. And just like that, we've identified the structure, we've found the clue, we've opposed or come up with the opposite of the clue. In this case is unplanned, we have planned, and then we match our answers. Okay, in this text completion, you'll note that things are a little trickier. First off, there's this word. It's a long word, it's a confusing word, it's notwithstanding. The function of notwithstanding is simply that of a reverser. It's no different from however, in that it takes the sentence, and as long as we have that comma, it splits the sentence into two parts. And these two parts are in contrast to one another. So again, it reverses the meaning of the first part. So you can think of despite as a good substitute for notwithstanding. However, there are some others that we haven't gone over yet, and some are nonetheless and regardless. These are important other reversers. However, if you were to put those in word for word, maybe it would kind of work, regardless of the diva's idolatrous reception, and nonetheless, or the diva had an idolatrous reception from her adoring fans, nonetheless. So you can see same function, but maybe you'd have to twist up the grammar a little. So I like to use despite as a substitute for notwithstanding, but again, all three of these words are reversers or sentence shifters. So, despite the diva's idolatrous reception, those close to her, familiar with her myriad shortcomings, treated her as someone hardly worthy of blank. So again, we have to note kind of the complexity of the sentence, because not only do we have this notwithstanding reverser, but the second part of the sentence doesn't just say, okay, well, we need to come up with an opposite from for adoring fans. So those close to her were not adoring of her. So therefore, they treated her as someone hardly worthy of not adoring. And so we want to note this role of the word not. When you have here this double shift in the second part of the sentence, that is the part after the comma, and there's also multiple commas, again, going back to the complexity of the sentence, it's that the part after the comma is in opposition to the first part. It doesn't even matter if you have these multiple commas. So you're only going to get this one shifter in terms, or reverser in terms of the word, but then when you get down here, you can see that, it's like saying she's someone not worthy of adoration. So you're kind of reversing it again, being that you needed a word meaning the opposite of adoring for the second part of the sentence, but by saying hardly worthy of, you're more or less saying not. And so it does the double negative and takes us back to not worthy of adoration. So we look for a word that means adoration, and again we match. And we get rid of contempt, which means hate. Consideration is a neutral word. Exaltation is when you praise someone highly, you elevate them to this lofty position, and that there is our answer. Notoriety means fame, but usually in a negative sense. So again, we want a word that's more similar to adoring, adulation, and of course this whole idea of idolatrous, as though she's this great idol. So again, exaltation works best. And success doesn't really talk about adoration, and she may be successful, but they're not saying she shouldn't be successful. They're just saying Don't treat her as though she's perfect, like an idol or a goddess. So again, the answer is C. In this video, we're going to deal with time shifts. It's a type of shift, and the signal word is something like once, where you know that this word is going to pit two times against each other. That is the past and the present. So at one time, regarded as an anomaly. So you can see right here that something was once regarded as an anomaly, but now it's going to be seen as something that is the opposite of anomaly. And that's how this functions. So some interesting or some key words in terms of time shifts you want to look out for. Of course, here we have once. You can have words like at first. So at first, regarded as an anomaly, the 50 home run season has become, and it would be the exact same sentence. So of course, once you recognize that you're dealing with the time shift, of course, you want to break down a sentence, simplify it if you have to. This is probably an easy sentence, so you just really want to go here, hone in on the keyword anomaly, come up with the opposite of anomaly, and we look here through the answers. Which one is the opposite of anomaly? If you're not sure what anomaly means, you may know the word anomalous, which comes from the word normal. Interesting, yeah. And you put the A in front of it, means not. So the opposite of normal or typical. And so we're going for a word, something that is not typical. The opposite would simply be typical. And that's all we have to do to solve a time shift. So again, look for that keyword. Here's the comma. The shift happens then after the comma. We oppose the keyword. We got typical. So let's try another one. Maybe one slightly harder. And in this case, you don't see once, but you see the word initially. So that's another possible word. But again, it's doing the exact same thing as once or any of these other time shifts below. So initially deemed, let's read this one, an affront to Taipei skyline, the Taipei 101 building is no longer considered a blank. Indeed, many residents contend that without the building, the harmony of the skyline would be broken. So we, of course, want to break down the sentence, and we see at the first part with the initially, it was seen as an affront. So you need to know this word. And it's something that could be defined more or less as an insult. Something that's an insult to Taipei skyline is this building. And now if you look at the next part here, it says it is no longer considered a blank. So we found this keyword here, which was affront, but is no longer considered an affront. And so though we have this shift here, notice the words no longer show that it has changed, but the word we actually want in the blank is the same. So it was once deemed as something that's ugly, but it's no longer, there's the time shift, considered ugly. You can even put ugly as a good word here to use, or ugliness in terms of parts of speech. So of course that doesn't really make sense, ugliness, but it's the idea of the connotation, what the word means. We want something that's ugly. So we look down here at the answers. And what do we have? Well, eyesore. If something is an eyesore, that's sore to your eyes, it could be ugly. So if you're not 100% sure, put a little question mark there, but that looks like it's probably the answer. Words like inconvenience don't really work in this context because you're doing something that's not pleasant to look at. It's not that it's an inconvenience. Stopgap, maybe there was a gap in the skyline beforehand and you're thinking, oh, that could be something. But again, that word does not mean ugliness or something that's an affront or an insult to one's view. Rather, stopgap is a measure or a substitute. And then we have here, get rid of C, get rid of B. We have here edifice, which is a trap answer in the sense that this Taipei 101 building is an edifice. So we're again looking for a word in the blank. That means something that's ugly, unsightly, and it's definitely not benefit. And so you can see we went through the time shift, we broke down the sentence, find the keyword, we opposed the keyword here at the very end, and in opposing the keyword, we essentially came up with the same word because of this no longer considered. And of course, eyesore, something that's ugly, and there's our answer. Okay, this sentence we're going to be dealing with a different type of shift, and it's a shift in perception. Now, this is a little bit more subtle, so we're going to read here, and of course we are going to notice the shift in the way that someone perceives someone or something else. So let's read here. Since Martha was so orthodox in her approach to classifying ancient texts, she's surprised. So here's the shift in how people are perceiving her. Surprised her colleagues when she developed a blank taxonomy by which to categorize newly discovered papyrus scrolls. So you can see that usually she's so orthodox, but now she surprised people when she developed something that is, and again, the shift shows us that the word in the blank has to be the opposite of orthodox. And that word is unconventional. So you can see how that works. Again, we identified the clue, picked up on the shift, notice the relationship, of course, between the clue and the blank, which is one that they are opposites. We found the opposite, and there's our answer. So that was quick and easy. So let's try another one that's a little harder. Okay, here it is. Virginia Woolf's foray into a stream of consciousness style was construed by many of her naysayers as reckless experimentalism. Only with the publication of Miss Dalloway did they concede that the author's aim had been far more blank all along. So again, as I said, these are definitely more subtle, and we have to pick up on the shift in a way one person or one group is perceiving another person. So we have these naysayers. How are they perceiving Miss Woolf or Mrs. Woolf? Well, they're saying that, she tried to do this stream of consciousness style and turned out to be reckless experimentalism. So what happens? Well, they shift only with the publication. So now that this came out, things changed. They conceded, they granted. They said, okay, we accept it. Your aim has been far more the opposite of what came before. So she was not reckless, but she had actually been far more opposite of reckless. So when you're reckless, you do not think. You just rush into something. The opposite is thinking beforehand, planning. And what word is that? Is it literary? Nope. That's a trap too, just because it's Virginia Woolf. Is it calculated? To be calculated is to know beforehand what you're doing. And that means thinking. That's the opposite of reckless. So there's a perfect answer. And just to eliminate these other ones, endearing, of course, doesn't work here. We're going for planned. Fortuitous means happening coincidentally in a pleasant way. Not quite the answer. And precipitate is a synonym for reckless here, which, of course, we want the opposite of reckless. And again, B is our answer. So key here, takeaway is notice the shift in perceptions, find that clue, find the opposite of that word, and in this case, it's B. In this video, we are going to go through some complex sentences in terms of their structure. You're going to notice some double shifts, some false shifts, etc. So let's read this one first, and of course, we're going to note the structure. Despite years of urban living, Keith was hardly the model of civility. Indeed, he continued to behave blank even during those occasions that called for the utmost propriety. So what do you notice here? Well, we see here in the structure that there's a despite. Okay, so there's a contrast. But wait a second, when you have this contrast, after this comma here, usually there's a blank, and so it's easy to say, okay, well, the first part of the sentence is opposite to this part. That's the usual shift. But here, we don't have a blank, either before the comma or right after the comma. So we want to note this word indeed. So indeed actually shows that there is continuity between what we had before. Keith was hardly the model of civility. He continued to behave as hardly the model of civility. Or you can look at it this way. He was hardly the model of civility. The opposition here is what? Well, he's not civil or doesn't have civility. So that's what we're looking for here. The opposite of civility. And of course we go to the answer choices. And now we're able to match them. So, coyly, to be coy is to be shy and bashful. That is not the opposite of civility, or to be civil. Courteous is a synonym. I'm going for the opposite of courteous. Unethically. In this case, that's a little bit extreme. So you want to, of course, eliminate these extreme words in some cases. Obviously, if it fits the blank, then you don't want to eliminate it. But in this case, we're not going for something as extreme as unethical. To be uncivil or not civil doesn't mean you're really breaking some moral law. So that's out. And then we have the word churlish. To be churlish is to be rude and unmannered, and that works perfectly. Again, we always want to come up with the opposite of words here. Otherwise, we can sometimes get trapped by words like selfishly. Well, he was selfish. He just wanted to do things his own way. Sure, you can interpret the sentence like that, but it's not the best answer because selfish is not the opposite of civil. So that's out with that one, and there's D. So that's one example of complex structure. Now let's take a look at another sentence here. Not without her detractors. So right off the bat, what are we noticing here? Well, we're noticing that not without is an example of a double negative. Let's keep reading. Frida Kahlo nonetheless emerged. So even though people, not without her detractors means people weren't her biggest fans, even though many people didn't like her, she still was nonetheless emerged. And then you'll notice this word albeit. Albeit can sometimes be a sentence shifter in of itself. But in this case, this is just showing when she emerged. It's not necessarily shifting the sentence. Again, it's not being an example of a false shift. And you will definitely see these in a lot of ETS questions, so watch out for those. The shifters have to do with the actual blank. So if we even got rid of this, it wouldn't do anything to the sentence. And that's oftentimes the best way to see if something is a false shifter or not. So again, not everybody liked her, but she still emerged as one of the, well, we want, again, the opposite of, not everyone liked her, still she emerged as one of the best. So we can put our own simple word in there, one of the best artists of Mexico in the 20th century. And then, of course, we eliminate. Hapless means unfortunate, that doesn't work. Preeminent means foremost at the top. That, of course, that works with best. So there's our answer. Sycophantic means she's fawning. She's kissing up to people, doesn't work at all. Peripheral means second rate. Controversial, well, yeah, she could definitely be a controversial artist, but there's no context backing that up. And there, again, is our answer, preeminent. So always note the structure when you're going through here. Don't just gloss over these important words. But as you notice, when we saw not without her detractors, we broke it down in our own words. That means not everybody liked her. If you don't do that, and you just try to read the entire sentence all the way through and then get to the end and think you can just put it together, that's going to get you in trouble. You want to break down bit by bit. And so you can say at the end, oh, I see. Okay, not everyone liked Frida Kahlo, but at the end of the day, now, later, she's an artist that is great, or one of the best. And there's our answer, preeminent. In this video, we're going to go through a tricky concept that I call false contrast. What I mean by that is we have a shift word, such as in this case, though, and instead of being the opposite of the part that comes right after though, the sentence is about something else. In this case, though less celebrated, Haydn was far more blank than Mozart. So he's not as popular as Mozart, therefore he's more what? Well, a bunch of things could probably go in here. I mean, he could be more friendly, he could definitely be more talented, maybe he's even more structured. And so we really need to read the entire sentence in order for us to really figure out what word fits in the blank. And so that's the thing. Always read the entire sentence, because sometimes, this is rare though, but sometimes it's not as always the exact opposite of what you think, a word that's right near a shift word. Now if we read on, we can see here the sentence structure is such that there's a or colon followed by some information. Mozart had 41 symphonies, Haydn penned 106. Aha! Haydn penned more symphonies than Mozart. So it's all about being more, well, more what? What's that word where you create many things? Well, if it doesn't come to mind, you definitely know it's not obscure or unknown. Friendliness doesn't really have much to do with it. And talented. Well, because you write more, does that necessarily mean you're talented? It could mean you're talented, maybe it does, but that's not the direct meaning of creating a lot. And so we get rid of talented. Same with structured. We don't know anything about the symphonies. I mean, maybe they were more structured, but the word prolific directly means creating more of something. In this case, Haydn was more prolific as far as symphonies go. So again, read the entire sentence, not always the exact opposite. Note sentence structure, as we did here. And then finally, make sure you pay attention to multiple keywords. Here, there really aren't multiple keywords. I mean, sure, we have less celebrated. That really turned out to be kind of like a decoy or a fake, something that didn't really apply to the sentence as much as the actual keywords here. Now, the thing about this false contrast is it becomes much more likely the more convoluted a sentence becomes. And this sentence is anything but convoluted. It's pretty straightforward. So let's take a look at another more convoluted sentence. Even though Malcolm X eventually went on to sever ties with members of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Brotherhood believed that far from being a heretic, Malcolm X endorsed a view of Islam that was more doctrinally blank than that of the more ostensibly orthodox sects. So obviously a lot going on here, and we see even though, right? Starts off there with a shift. Well, he went on to sever ties with these people. Therefore, he's the opposite of somebody who severs ties. So it's not really clear. Sure, the word in here is going to be something positive because, you have him severing ties. Ooh, that's negative, and the shift shows us there's probably something positive. But that leaves us with both A, pure, and B, renowned, or well-known. Compromise means kind of a lower quality, vague, something that's not clear. It's also negative. And differentiated is just a neutral word. So, of course, we're going for something here that is positive, and that's why we're left with A and B. But as you can see, the first part doesn't help us out. Therefore, again, read the entire sentence. So note the sentence structure, read the entire sentence, and notice that it's not always the exact opposite of what we'd be led to expect. So the sentence structure here is there's a lot more going on. Far from being a heretic specifically is kind of this hidden keyword embedded down here. And so they didn't see this guy as a heretic, someone that went against the teachings. Far from it, his teachings were more close to the actual thing, and that's why pure works here. Renowned, just because something is well known doesn't mean that it is closer to the actual doctrine. Again, a heretic goes away from the doctrine, says stuff that isn't true religiously, whereas the opposite of that would be someone whose doctrine is pure. So renowned doesn't quite get there, and you can see that, again, the more convoluted it becomes, the more we're going to be kind of led astray by some of what looks like keywords when they're actually going to be multiple keywords, and the more specific keyword here is far from, meaning the opposite of being a heretic. Now, we could end it right there, but why not try an even more difficult, more convoluted text completion? And this is kind of getting you prepared for the double and triple blank text completions. You can see this one right here. Woo! I know, scary. Very long, and yes, most one blank text completions are not going to be this long. Because again, this is to show you some of how you can be led astray or be uncertain about certain parts of a sentence, and then not be able to pick between two answer choices because they both seem to work. So pause the video, because I'm actually not going to read this. It's way too long. And after you've done pausing this video, let's go through it. Okay, so let's start off with the beginning. No less incendiary, so very controversial. It's a hot button issue, fracking. So you get all of this information, and then you still have this to read. Has been curiously absent from the national dialogue come election time, perhaps because voters are typically blank environmental problems that do not occur in their backyard, so to speak. And so you have this other part that shows you, yeah, it's a really controversial issue, but it's not really around that much when it's time for election time. People aren't actually talking about it. It's not what makes them vote for one candidate over the other. So it seems like their voters are typically what about environmental problems that do not occur in their own backyard? What does this have to do with anything? And so here we have this little part that says a practice that mostly takes place in remote parts of the country. And that's the whole idea. These multiple keywords, most of the times, they're there for a reason. And so this part that it's controversial, sure, it kind of helps you, but it doesn't give you something as specific as you need, as the fact that this is something that doesn't happen. That is, fracking is something that doesn't happen in people's backyards. And therefore, this is something that voters are typically what? Well, this is not something that suddenly becomes that incendiary. It may be incendiary generally, but then, controversial, but then come election time, they kind of forget about it. Are they misinformed about it? Let's go through the answer choices now. Well, just because you're not really that swayed by it or motivated by it, it doesn't ruffle your feathers, this whole idea of fracking during election time, it's not the same as actually being misinformed or misguided about it. Worked up over is kind of the opposite of what we're going for here. We're going for something that doesn't mean we're getting upset, but we actually don't care about this really controversial issue, or an issue that's usually really controversial. And that leaves us with C, unmoved by, where if you're unmoved by something, it doesn't affect you emotionally. D, disenfranchised. That just has to do with vote. So if you take away the ability for someone to vote, that person has become disenfranchised. So that's a trap answer because it kind of captures the general context here. So get rid of that. And smitten with means just in love with, again, which is the opposite of this whole idea of unemotional or unmoved by, which is answer C. So again, get ready for the kind of these false contrasts and the more difficult 2 and 3 blank text completions. But here's a good example just to see how it works in a 1 blank text completion. And again, I don't want people to think, oh, this is really hard, this was blowing my mind. This is supposed to be really hard. This was much harder than the other 2. So again, work your way up to it, and you can always come back to these lesson videos once you've done a bunch of practice questions in the product and have gotten better at text completions. Come back to this, try it again without looking at the answer, and see what happens. In this video, we're going to talk about a change in perception, where there is a shift in how somebody or something is viewed. In this example, we have Nelson. And Nelson is typically open-handed. And so words that clue us in that we are dealing with a shift in perception is typically. Because after the comma, we know that the blank or that which comes in the second part of the sentence, the blank happens to come in the second part of the sentence here, is opposite of what's going on in the first part of the sentence. And here we have this person's open-handed. So typically he's open-handed, comma, it's almost like saying but. So we know that there again is a contrast, so we want the opposite of open-handed. So you can choose your own word and match. Of course, it helps to know what open-handed means. Somebody who's open-handed is generous, and you can almost imagine that they have their hand open, they're giving. And so we want someone who is the opposite of giving. So someone who holds on to everything. Now, notice A here is close-minded. Look how literal that is. They're trying to trap you there with, oh, the opposite of open is closed. But it's not closed-minded. It's the idea that someone doesn't want to give. Garrulous. You definitely want to know your vocabulary here. And this is a very important word. It's important because it shows up a lot. It means talkative. So we can get rid of that because we're not going for talkative here. We're going for someone who is not generous. Parsimonious, you may not know. It is an important GRE word, but let's come back to it. Somebody who's tactless, does not behave the proper way in social settings. That is not what we're going for. And finally, admonitory, which you may know the word admonish, which means to warn or caution beforehand. That is not the opposite of generous. And so just like that, we can arrive at the answer through our process of elimination. And parsimonious means somebody who's stingy, not giving, the opposite of open-handed. So this is a pretty straightforward sentence. I mean, besides maybe the difficult vocab word parsimonious. So let's take look at an example that is much more difficult. Wow, look at that thing. Huge. But if you remember what we've learned in other videos, you want to cut through the noise, break down the sentence, simplify it. So let's do that here. Along a cornerstone of modern neurology. This is just giving us background information. What follows is important here. The idea. The idea the brain is fixed has not only been challenged. And if you read on, it says, but has been convincingly refuted. So the idea that the brain is fixed is no longer something people believe in. So people believe that the brain is opposite of fixed. So again, notice that change in perception there. So opposite of fixed is changing. The brain is changing, not fixed. That's the current view. Notice that I glossed over this or totally ignored this because again, this is just background information into how it was refuted. But the idea here is today, brain is not seen as fixed, but as changing. So now continue on here. To assert that the mature brain is anything but blank is tantamount to scientific heresy. So we know it is changing. To say it is anything but changing, and so now we can put our word in here, is equal to, and the word tantamount means equal to scientific heresy. And it's also important to note that anything but means not. So to assert that the brain is not changing, that is fixed. Assert that the brain fixes heresy in the science circles, because today it's been so convincingly refuted that the brain is fixed, and therefore we have the word changing here in the blank. So we've come up with our own word, and now we have to eliminate. So you probably look at A and say, oh look, plastic, knives, fork, plastic plates, yeah, that can't work. But let's actually come back to this. Shiftless. Notice here that, again, we're going for where that's changing. Shift is change. Shiftless actually doesn't even work in this context here. So get rid of B. Shiftless definitely does not mean changing. Immutable is the opposite of changing, something that is fixed. So I can get rid of that. Alert does not relate to changing. And fertile, something that gives rise to lots of ideas. It can be used literally to refer to a field that grows lots of crops, but also to perhaps a brain that gives rise to a lot of ideas, but that doesn't make any sense here. And so just like that, you can see we're left with plastic. Now, plastic has a second definition. It means changing, adaptable, not fixed. And just like that, there's our answer. But again, note the shift in perception. If the sentence is long like this one, be able to break it down the way I did, come up with your own word. And you'll notice that sometimes you just take a word in the sentence, such as fixed, and see what happens to fixed. Fixed, well, after that it becomes not fixed. But then it comes back to the very end here, the anything but, it goes back to fixed. So you can kind of see the sentence, taking a word, coming up with the opposite, and then flipping it back again. And on the more difficult GRE text completions and sentence equivalence questions, you'll see that double reverse. But key to this video, of course, is to note the shift in perceptions. And if it's simply an adjective in the first part of the sentence before the comma, and there's no other shifting after the comma, the blank is going to be opposite to a word before the comma. In this video, we are going to go through a type of apposition. That means when two words or phrases are next to each other, but with a little twist, or should I say shift. And this is called a reverse apposition. To show you this, let's read the sentence. Although a devoted physician with a thriving practice, Albert Schweitzer was no mere musical dabbler, but a blank organist. His Bach recordings are even prized today. So you may think, oh look, there's this wonderful shift going on. Although a devoted physician, and then I can just go to the blank and think of something that's the opposite of devoted physician. That is actually not correct. And in a sense, this is also a false shift. Rather, there's a different structure going on here. It's not that although isn't signaling some sort of contrast between the phrases on either side of this comma. However, if we read more closely, we will see that, the contrast is he was very busy as a doctor, as a physician, yet he wasn't just someone who toyed around on the organ. So notice the structure. He was not A, and in this case A stands for musical dabbler, but B. And therein lies the shift. So A has to be the opposite of B. So what word would go in the blank then? Not a person who is a musical dabbler, someone who toys around, that is, but the opposite would be someone who is skilled. Now, if you're unsure, it's always good to read the entire sentence as well, because we'll see at the end there's another clue. His Bach recordings are even prized today. Well, he is someone that people like to listen to in terms of an organist. So if people want to buy his music, or at least listen to the recordings, then he's not someone who just toys around at the piano, or in this case the organ, but he's actually somebody who is skilled. Based on that, we can go through the answer choices here. Cautious is not quite the same thing. A loyal organist. So you're usually loyal to a group or a friend. It doesn't really imply this idea of skill, being a master at something. Nor does the word generous, which kind of plays off this idea of being a doctor here. Fledgling means something that's just beginning off, which would be the opposite of someone who is skilled. And finally, that leaves us with consummate, which is someone who's highly accomplished at something. In this case, Schweitzer was highly accomplished as an organist. Now, going back to this reverse apposition real quickly, you have here the structure not A but B, and this is a common, or probably the most common form of the reverse apposition. You can also have here, he was A, not B, which is a little bit more straightforward, and that's where in the GRE usually you won't see this because it's a little bit too obvious, and you'll usually see the not A but B structure.